Welcome to Heartfelt Revenge Stories. Christmas at my parents' house always smelled like cinnamon and something else. Something underneath the warmth of the candles and the sound of familiar carols playing from the kitchen speaker. Something that had no name but that I had learned to recognize the moment I stepped through the front door every single year. Smelled like comparison. Please subscribe and like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Maya, and every December without fail, I drove 2 hours to my parents' house and walked back into a version of myself I had spent the entire year outgrowing. The dining room was staged the same way it always was. Heavy dishes, polished silverware that only came out for occasions my mother deemed worthy. The good tablecloth, candles lit before anyone arrived, as though the room itself needed to perform before the guests did. My mother moved through it all with the focused energy of someone hosting an awards ceremony rather than a family dinner, adjusting centerpieces and straightening chairbacks, and checking the oven with the gravity of a woman who believed that how a table looked was a direct reflection of how her life had turned out. I took my usual seat, the one near the corner of the table. Not quite at the edge, not quite at the center. The safe middle, where I had learned years ago I could exist without drawing too much attention in either direction. And then the front door opened. My sister Sophie arrived late, which was not an accident. Sophie had always understood the theater of entrances. She came in on a wave of cold air and expensive perfume, wearing a new coat that was structured and clearly not cheap, and she let my mother help her out of it the way someone lets a stylist adjust their outfit before they walk onto a stage. My aunt made a sound of admiration. My uncle sat up straighter. "Show them," my mother urged. Before Sophie had even properly sat down. "Show them the pictures." Sophie smiled the way she always smiled when she already knew the room was hers, and she unlocked her phone. "It's just something small," she said, which meant the absolute opposite. The screen moved slowly around the table. A 2-story colonial house. White shutters. A wide front porch dressed in Christmas garland like something out of a magazine. My aunt inhaled so dramatically you would have thought she was watching fireworks. My uncle nodded in the way men nod when they are calculating what something cost and approving of the number. "It is absolutely beautiful," my mother said, and her voice had that particular thickness in it, that swelling pride that she had never quite managed to keep out of her tone when Sophie did something she could announce to the room. "My daughter just bought a beautiful house." My daughter. Not my daughters. I noticed. I always noticed. And the noticing never stopped feeling like a small familiar sting. The kind you get from a paper cut in the same place it has cut you before. You know it is coming and somehow that does not make it hurt any less. I smiled at the right moments. I have had years of practice at that. Sophie angled the phone toward me last, as though it were an afterthought. "You should come see it sometime," she said. There was genuine warmth in her voice, I want to be clear about that. But there was also something else underneath it. A kind of quiet checking. She was watching to see if I would flinch. "It is really beautiful," I said. And I meant it. The house was lovely. That was not the problem. The problem was never the thing itself. My mother lifted her wine glass. "We are just so proud. She has really settled now." And there it was. Settled. That word. I felt something old and tired stir in my chest, something I had carried to this table so many times that it had worn a groove in me. The familiar reflex rose up automatically, the one that wanted me to straighten in my chair and begin summarizing my life in defensible terms. Mention the promotion. Mention the consulting clients. Mention the 3-year lease I had just signed on a space with floor-to-ceiling windows and the kind of quiet that costs something to find in a city. Prove that I was not drifting. Prove that I was deliberate. Prove that settled was not the only word that counted. But I said nothing. Because I had stopped doing that months ago. Stay with me. Because what happened at that dinner table is something I have needed to say out loud for a very long time. There was no dramatic moment when I decided to stop sending updates home. No fight. No tearful phone call. No declaration. I just noticed, somewhere in the middle of an ordinary week, that every achievement I shared became a preface to unsolicited advice. Every decision I made arrived back to me with a raised eyebrow attached. Every good thing in my life was received with a yes, but... And so I stopped. Not out of anger. Out of exhaustion. I stopped offering drafts of my life for other people to revise. My mother had not seemed to notice, Or if she had chosen not to say anything directly. That was her way. She preferred the sideways approach. The leading question. The strategic comparison. Sophie leaned back in her chair with that particular ease she had always carried. That faint smile that said she was about to say something light and playful and fully expected the room to applaud her for it. So she said, swirling her wine glass with the casual confidence of someone who had never once second-guessed herself at this table. When are you going to settle down? Laughter moved around the room like it had been waiting for its cue. Not cruel laughter, not deliberately unkind, just the comfortable, easy laughter of people who have heard a joke so many times it has stopped being examined. My aunt smiled into her napkin. My uncle chuckled. My mother looked pleased that the subject had been raised without her having to raise it. And I felt heat rise slowly into my chest. Not anger exactly. I want to be precise about that because anger would have been simpler. It was more like an old bruise remembering itself. The kind of ache that lives beneath the surface of things and only makes itself known when something presses exactly on the right spot. I thought about the keys in my coat pocket hanging by the front door. I thought about Daniel's boots sitting by the entrance of our apartment, the way they were always slightly askew because he never quite lined them up properly and I had stopped trying to correct it because somewhere along the way it had become one of my favorite things about him. I thought about the small study we had painted a deep dark green because we both agreed that some rooms should feel like being inside something rather than just standing in it. I thought about the slow Sunday mornings that did not require explanation or performance or defense. I looked at Sophie. Then I looked at my mother. And something settled in me. Not resignation. Something steadier than that. Something that felt almost like relief. I realized, sitting in that corner seat I had occupied since childhood, that I did not need this room to understand my life in order for my life to be real. So I smiled. I already did, I said. Sophie's eyebrow lifted. The room shifted slightly, the way a room does when something unexpected enters it. Not an explosion, just a change in the air. Oh, she said, recalibrating. When? I just did not invite anyone who doubts me. The silence that followed was not hostile. It was just honest. My uncle stopped mid-sip. My cousin's fork hovered somewhere above her plate. Even the background noise from the kitchen seemed to dim slightly, as though the house itself paused to listen. My mother blinked. What does that mean? I have needed to say this for years. Keep listening. Because this dinner was about to go somewhere none of us expected. It means, I said, keeping my voice level and quiet, that I have built a life I am genuinely deeply happy with. I just stopped asking for commentary on it. No one laughed. Sophie's color changed first. A flush that started somewhere at her collarbone and moved upward. I watched it happen and felt nothing triumphant about it, just a kind of tired clarity. No one doubts you, she said quickly. I did not argue. I did not pull out evidence. I did not list the graduation day when my job offer had been described as a good stepping stone in the same breath it was delivered. I did not bring up the birthday dinner where my apartment had been described as cozy in the tone people use when they mean small. I did not mention the years of arriving at this table with good news and leaving with the faint feeling that the good news had been quietly reclassified as not quite enough. I just held her gaze. Silence, when you stop being afraid of it, becomes something useful. My mother tried to find solid ground again. Her voice shifted to something more casual, more conversational. The register she used when she wanted to change the direction of something without appearing to. Well, she said lightly, where is this life you are so happy with? Who is this situation? It is in Brookside, I said. We moved in last spring. We. The word landed on the table like something small and certain. Claire's lips parted. Sophie's expression recalibrated again. My mother set down her wine glass with slightly more force than necessary. You moved in with someone, Sophie said. It was not quite a question. Yes. And you did not tell us? I shrugged. Not defensively. Not apologetically. Just honestly. It did not feel necessary, I said. And that was the moment. Not a dramatic confrontation. Not tears or raised voices or anything that would make a clean story to tell later. Just that sentence. It did not feel necessary. 5 words that rearranged the furniture of every assumption in that room. Because what they heard, underneath those words, was the truth that I had been living quietly for longer than any of them had realized. That I had stopped treating their approval as a required step in the process of my own life. That the milestones I reached were no longer automatically theirs to witness. That access to my joy now required something more than shared blood and a seat at the same Christmas table. It required actually seeing me. My aunt cleared her throat. She was the quietest person at the table, the one who observed more than she spoke, and she looked at me with something in her eyes that I did not expect. Well, she said simply, "Are you happy?" And it was the only question that had ever actually mattered. Yes, I said. I did not elaborate. I did not dress it up. I did not offer proof. Dinner resumed slowly in fragments. Conversations restarted in smaller, quieter clusters. Sophie was noticeably quieter. My mother watched me differently for the rest of the meal. Not warmly, not coldly. Just differently. Like someone who has been looking at a painting for years and has only just noticed that the light in it is coming from an unexpected direction. Stay right here. Because what my mother said to me quietly near the end of the evening is the part that stayed with me longest. The dinner wound down the way family dinners do. Leftovers divided into containers. Coats retrieved from bedrooms. The table cleared in a companionable, slightly subdued silence that was different from the silence earlier in the evening. That earlier silence had been about recalibration. This one was about digestion. Not the food. The evening. My mother found me near the kitchen doorway at some point, away from the main group, and she spoke quietly enough that it was clearly intended only for me. "You could have told me," she said. Her voice was softer than it had been all evening. Not wounded exactly, but something in the neighborhood of it. I met her eyes. "You could have asked," I said. It was not sharp. It was not delivered with an edge. It was simply factual, the way a thing can be true without being cruel. She could have asked. She had had every opportunity to ask. She had had years of Sunday phone calls and holiday visits and birthday dinners where she could have set down the measuring tape and simply asked her daughter how her life actually felt from the inside. She had not asked, and so I had stopped volunteering. She looked at me for a moment longer than she usually did, and I could see something working behind her eyes. Not quite an apology. Not quite an acknowledgement. Something earlier than either of those things. The very beginning of a question she had not yet found the words for. I did not push. I had learned that some things need to arrive in their own time, and pushing only delays them. At one point during the coat gathering, Sophie appeared beside me near the front door. She was holding her wool coat in both arms, and she had lost the particular brightness she usually wore at these gatherings, that performative ease that said the room was hers. She looked for the first time in a long time, like someone who was not entirely sure of her footing. "I did not mean anything by it," she said. Her voice was quiet. "I know," I said. And I did. That was the honest truth of it. Sophie had not set out to diminish me. She had simply grown so comfortable being the benchmark that she had stopped noticing she was doing it. She had spent so many years being the one the room turned toward that she had never had to consider what it felt like to be the one the room turned away from. She had not been cruel. She had been comfortable. And I had been tired. There is a difference, and it matters, and I had finally stopped pretending the difference did not exist. We did not hug goodbye with the usual warmth. We hugged the way people do when something real has passed between them and neither of them is quite ready to name it yet. A little more careful. A little more honest. Tell me in the comments. And if you have dealt with something similar, share your story. You are not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Outside, the air hit me like something clean and necessary. Sharp and cold and completely indifferent to everything that had just happened inside that house. I walked to my car through the quiet dark, past the garland on the porch railing and the warm light still spilling from the dining room window, and I noticed something. I did not feel smaller than when I had arrived. Stay with me for the final part. Because what I understood on that drive home is something I have been trying to find the words for ever since. I sat in my car for a few minutes before starting the engine. I do not know why. I was not crying, though part of me had expected to be. I was not angry, though that would have been easier in some ways. I was just sitting in the quiet of my own company, in the dark outside a house that had always made me feel simultaneously at home and like a guest, and I was trying to locate exactly what I was feeling. It took me a while to find the word for it. Peace. Not the peace of resolution because nothing had been resolved, not really. My mother had not apologized. Sophie had not had a revelation. The family had not gathered around me with open arms and announced that they had been wrong to measure me all these years and they were sorry and they saw me now. None of that had happened. Life is not a film and that kind of ending is almost never the real one. But something else had happened. Something quieter and more durable. They understood now that my life was continuing with or without their recognition of it. That the milestones I reached were real regardless of whether they were announced at this table. That Daniel and the green study and the floor-to-ceiling windows and the slow Sunday mornings were not waiting for anyone's blessing in order to exist. That I had built something genuinely good, not loudly, not in a way that made headlines at Christmas dinner, but carefully and honestly and with my whole attention. And that was enough. I thought about the years I had spent carrying a quiet grief about this. The effort it had taken to walk into this house and hold myself together while the room rearranged itself around Sophie's achievements as though they were the weather and I was just something that happened to be standing outside in it. The energy I had spent preparing my defenses before I even arrived. The way I had rehearsed summaries of my own life on the drive over, not to share them with joy but to protect myself with them, to use them as evidence that I was keeping up, that I was worthy of the same warmth in my mother's voice. That grief was still there. I want to be honest about that. It did not dissolve in a single dinner. Grief like that lives in the body and it takes longer than one evening to work its way out. But something had shifted in the weight of it. Because I had stopped performing and started simply existing in that room, and the room had not collapsed. The family had not disowned me. My mother had not stopped loving me. She had just been asked for perhaps the first time, to love me on terms I had set rather than terms she had assumed. And she had looked at me differently. That look. I kept coming back to it on the drive home. Not warm exactly, not yet. But recalibrating. A door that had been stuck beginning to move. I thought about Daniel at home, probably still awake, probably in the green study with a book and a cup of tea that had gone cold because he always forgot about it. And I felt the specific warmth that comes from knowing exactly where you belong. I thought about my aunt asking if I was happy. And the way the question had come from the quietest corner of the room as though she had been saving it for exactly the right moment. Yes, I had said. Just that. Just yes. No footnotes. No supporting documentation. No apology for the brevity of the answer. Because happiness is not a draft. It does not require revision. It does not improve under critique. Just needs to be lived. I started the engine and pulled out onto the quiet street. And the house shrank in my rearview mirror, lit up and warm and full of the people who had shaped me, who had sometimes hurt me, who I still loved in the complicated, layered way you love people who have known you your entire life. I was not driving away from them. I was just driving home. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, those were not the same direction. There was no applause waiting for me. No dramatic reconciliation. No moment where everyone finally understood. Just the road ahead and the radio low and the quiet knowledge that I had sat at that table tonight and told the truth without raising my voice, and I had walked out the other side of it still whole, still mine, still enough. That is the thing they do not tell you about setting boundaries with the people who raised you. They do not tell you it feels like freedom immediately. Sometimes it feels like loss first, the loss of the version of the relationship you always wished you had, the version where they simply see you without being asked to. But underneath that loss, if you stay with it long enough, something else is waiting. The version of yourself that stopped shrinking to fit the space they assigned you. The version that takes up the right amount of room. The version that drives home in the quiet dark and feels, for the first time, like enough.